Is it true that you worked on a project recently that assisted in getting some of our allies out of the withdrawal?
Yes. So when we pulled out of Afghanistan, as you know, there was a lot happening and not really a secure plan in place, essentially, for the folks trying to get over here, and for folks resettling. So I was part of a community of veterans, intel folks like DOD, DOS, who kind of rallied together and joined this Underground Railroad to help these folks. So there was a bunch of us operating stateside. We had contacts on the ground in Afghanistan. So we were working on Slack. Folks were reaching out to us left and right. I had a family that reached out to me on Twitter and literally just essentially begging for their lives, right? So they're like, can you help us get out of here? We're like, what can we do? So I personally, for example, for that family, they sent me all their documentation. We verified it as best we could on the back end here. We had our points on the ground in Afghanistan, and they would exchange locations, right? So, for example, this family was like, hey, I'm at this gate. I have a pink towel. Is there anyone on the inside that can get me out? Randomly, we get a ping at like 4:30 in the morning. Hey, do you guys have any folks on the outside that need to get in to get on this flight out? Yes, somehow worked out, and we would have the folks grab those folks and bring them inside. So we did this for a few days until it was not possible anymore. So that was one way we helped. And then stateside, we started realizing that a lot of these refugees were coming here without anything, right? Like literally the suitcases on their back, and generally like big families. So Sacramento was a hot spot for these folks. So we worked closely with IRC, the International Rescue Committee, and started welcoming these people at the airport. So we made signs, we showed up, got our local community involved, and it kind of exploded from there. I don't know if I should say exploded, but kind of grew from there. And I had a little bit of a Twitter following, right? So I was sharing these stories. Folks from around the country, around the world, essentially were like, hey, how can we help? So I would build out Amazon wish lists. So we helped set up, I mean, honestly, it got to the point of like 100 plus families, but really helped get these people, beds, pajamas, clothes, anything you can possibly think of to get them started here on the States. So that's like a really fast summary of what we did.
That's amazing. So you really sounds like you saved some lives.
We did, and it's weird to think about. We still talk to, obviously we're a bunch of friends, and even my boss now, he worked helping these folks too, and we're just like, what did we actually do? Like, I think when we're 80, like in our rocking chairs, we're a little like Iraq, Afghanistan hat that, those hats. We're gonna be like, what the fuck did we actually do? Because like you don't even have time to like decompress or even really think about it. You just jump in and help. And in retrospect, like what happened? Like, why was it kind of shouldered onto the folks, civilians, veterans, whomever, to kind of work through this? But anyways, we did. Grateful, still have connections with a lot of these families, and most of them are doing really well now.
Amazing. Thank you so much for stepping up and doing that. That's just such a beautiful service to the world. So thank you for that. And just for like anyone out there listening, these are people who were, I guess, like Afghani people who were helping us during the war. Can you
Yep.
kind of just explain a little bit about like who they were and what they were doing and what would have happened to the people that if you didn't help them to get out?
Yeah, so some of the families that we worked with were in the Afghan military, right? So they worked side by side with American soldiers, the alphabet soup agencies, those type of folks. One other gentleman worked in he was intel. So just all these types of jobs, right? Like construction, whatever. And they had their like scheduled meetings at the embassy to come stateside, right? To look at their why am I blanking on their visas, right? So these folks were like in line in the process to do all the right things to get here, but it
Mhm.
kind of all just again imploded very quickly. So they were essentially going to be stuck in Afghanistan, right? So they had to navigate the Taliban, our government, to even get on planes to get to the airport to get here. So we were kind of like the liaison between them on the ground and the folks on the inside to get them here. So there was one family who, man, the kid was 17 years old trying to get over here with his family, and we were working with him literally trying to get him around the Taliban checkpoints. And he would get so far and be like, I can't go any further. We would get so far, I can't go any further. And it took him like 3 or 4 tries. And they finally threw up a ladder against the wall of the airport. And he got in on like the last day we were getting folks out. So it was, and it's very surreal because that kid, right, was at my house in Sacramento playing with my 4-year-old daughter, 5-year-old daughter at the time.
Oh, wow.
Like, yeah, and it's just like what would have happened to you if we didn't get out? Like he'd probably be dead, right? You know?
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't want to be too dark, but
Oh,
surely the people who did not get out were killed and possibly worse, tortured or imprisoned. And um,
yeah,
so it
yeah.
was really important that you did what you did. And yeah, again, thank you for that.
Thank you. Yeah, there was a whole group of us, so I'm not gonna take all the credit, obviously, but yeah, it was a good network of folks.
It's a little bit of a sensitive topic, because people did pass away, and I was not a veteran, so it's a little bit hard for me to speak on. But from a veteran's POV, I mean, how do you feel? Like, for example, was in tears when I saw the news and people are hanging off of airplanes and begging to get out, and I was just like crying for humanity. And from a veteran's perspective, I mean, how do you feel when you see stuff like that? And I think people forget about this. This wasn't that long ago, you know.
Yeah, I think for us, it was like immediately, what can we do? Like, we don't have boots on the ground, but what can we do here? And we all just rallied, right? So we were up, in the middle of the night, contacting one another. Like, I had a buddy in Texas, Rick, who he would send us pictures, and it was like his own little intel space, right? He had like 6 computers going, like dots here, things there. And it's just like, how do we help the people that helped us for 20 plus years, right? Like, this is
Mhm.
the least that we can do. And if we
Mhm.
help one family, one person, then that matters. So I think that was the perspective that we had of the entire situation. And
Yeah.
again, I don't think a lot of us have processed it yet, right? Because it was so fast. And
Yeah.
it's like, all right, well, let's go back to work. Okay. And I will say, I had a chance to meet the family that contacted me via Twitter. They live in Connecticut. I met them like a year later at my mom's celebration of life ceremony. And I'm in this like American Legion parking lot in my hometown. This family's from Afghanistan. And I think he was 3 at the time. This 3-year-old little Afghan boy just darts towards me. I've never met him, right? And he just gives me like the biggest hug. And I'm in instant tears, right? And then I find out that this family has a photo of me in their house, which is like very sweet and like, but like bizarre, right? But to this kid, it's like he's the reason that he is here, and that I did one good thing, right? Like, hopefully,
Yeah.
that's my ticket to
Yeah.
something good in the universe, right?
That's beautiful. Yeah. It's kind of like this is why we all try to be of service. If you can help
Yeah,
one person, then it was all worth it.
all that matters. Yeah.
You mentioned it was at your mom's celebration of life ceremony. I'm sorry, what I don't actually know what that is. What's a celebration of life?
So instead of a funeral, my mom passed. So we had a celebration of life for her. Yeah.
Oh, beautiful. I'm sorry for your loss.
No, thank you.
Um, Speaking of your family and speaking of Iraq, one thing that sometimes gets, I think, missed in some of the veteran stories is the effect that deployment also has on your family. And I know that the deployment was very hard on your family. Can we back up a little bit and talk maybe a little bit about even going back to like maybe your childhood and your relationship with your parents and then leading up to going to deployment and how that was on you and your family?
Yeah. So I joined the Army Reserve at 17. I was a kid from the suburbs. I was a cheerleader. Like, I was barely making it through high school. And my parents both worked at an education center in upstate New York. And at the time, so this was 2001. So at the time, they had recruiters at this school. So they became friends with one of the recruiters. And I was toying with the idea of joining just the reserves, right? Because it's like, yeah, it's a little bit safe. Yeah, right. So I talked to this gentleman. My dad was in the army, served in Korea. My dad was 50 when he had me, so he was older. My grandparents were Navy, Army, Battle of the Bulge. My family service goes back to the American Revolution, War of 1812, right? So I have a history of service. So I was open to the idea. So I met with this recruiter, chatting with him, and I was like, oh man, like money for school, you know, at the time, I really wanted to be in the FBI. So I was like, a military background will help me in this process. So I connected with the recruiter, and then bam, September 11th happens, right?
Mhm.
So again, my only, recollection or memories of war is the Gulf War. I was 6 years old, watching it like play out on the TV in the living room, and mom like scooping me up and like taking me in the other room, right? So I was like, okay, I'm still considering this. Should I do this? And my mom was like, Katie, there's a chance you could go to war. And I was like, Mom, no one's gonna send me. Like, why would anyone send me anywhere? And she's like, all right, bitch, like, good luck. So I end up joining December 7th, 2001. So
Mhm.
I joined 17 and finish out high school, go to boot camp, Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And fast forward 2 years, I'm in community college waiting tables, and I get a phone call from one of my sergeants in my reserve unit that I'm going to deploy.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm mid waiting tables. I take the phone call. I step outside. I cry very briefly. I'm like, oh, fuck. It's like, my mom was right. I cry, go back in, finish waiting at the tables, go home. And my mom was like, well, told you so, like in a very sweet mom way. And my
Mhm.
dad was like, I had fun. I deployed to Germany, like it was great. I was like, cool guys, I'm going to Iraq. And then I think the impact really started to wear on my family right then. So
Mhm.
my parents had a history of alcoholism, right? My
Mhm.
dad stopped drinking when I was 12, was sober until the time he found out I was deploying. So as I find out I'm deploying, my dad breaks his sobriety. And
Oh,
this was
wow.
like my best friend, right? Like the person that bought me my first bra. He went with me to get tampons. Like we were ride or die besties.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
And
so
is it true that he also he got sober because of you when you were a kid? Is that true too?
yeah. So our family was falling apart, right? Like on the outside, it all looked okay, but on the inside, yeah. So he got sober. It was like constant fighting, throwing alcohol down like the kitchen sink. Like, can someone pull it together, right? So he did it for me, right? And I always encouraged him. He would bring home those little coins from the AA meetings, right? So I was like his buddy, and his buddy was leaving. And I think that's kind of when everything just started to shit the bed.
And so he started drinking right after you deployed. How long had he been sober for?
Okay, so he started before I deployed. So he was sober 12 years. So
Okay.
like the 2 weeks leading up to my deployment, where they had to drive me to Fort Totten in Queens, New York, he broke sobriety. So I was like, how am I going to deploy with a dad in this situation, a mom who's also a functioning alcoholic? I was devastated. So I did everything that like I rationally thought I could do to help him before like within my remaining 2 weeks, right? So I called his sponsor. I went to AA meetings with him. I sat there and I was like, okay, like we got this. And he sobered up for a couple days and drove me to Queens, New York, and I went on with my deployment, started my deployment.
Mm-hmm. And where were you stationed?
So I was at a reserve unit in upstate New York in Schenectady. I got cross leveled, meaning they pulled folks, like individuals from units, built another unit. So my unit that I deployed was the 301st Area Support Group out of Fort Totten, New York. So from there, we went to Fort Dix, did our pre-deployment training, and then went to Kuwait for a couple weeks and then into Iraq.
Got it. Got it. And how long were you there for?
So I did a year. I was just an admin person, and I was like, if I'm going to Iraq, there's no way I'm just going to sit behind a computer, right, for a year. So during training, they essentially were like, hey, we're going to build out a couple offices. And one was the public affairs shop.
Mhm.
And I had taken, some writing courses in community college. I took some photography courses, and I really, really was just in love with that medium of art.
Mhm.
And they were like, we need one junior, like enlisted folks to fill a spot in the public affairs shop. And I was like, oh, like I volunteer, please take me. So the major at the time, there were a handful of us that volunteered. So the major at the time was like, yeah, we'll see how training goes, and I'll get to know you guys a little bit more, and we'll figure out who I'm going to bring over to that shop. So we're training. in the middle of training, and it gets to driving a deuce and a half truck, right? No one wants to drive this fucking truck except for me. So I was like, I like trucks. So I end up driving the truck. And after I do this, training exercise, the major pulls me over. She's like, all right, I'm picking you. I was like, really? Like, why? She's like, because you drove the truck. I was like, really? I just had to. She was like, yeah, you took initiative. No one wanted to fucking do it. I was like, okay, cool. So that allowed me to be a photojournalist for the entire year that I was deployed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. So
Yeah.
is that where you discovered your passion for like writing and photography?
I did. So like I said, I dabbled in it a bit, but then for that whole year, it was my job. I wrote for the base newspaper. I got to meet people. I got to, meet Iraqis. I got to travel a little bit. Yes, I absolutely fell in love with like the power of writing and photography. I was like, this is what I'm doing the rest of my life. Like I changed, fast forward, I changed my major. I ended up getting a degree in journalism, and then I got a master's in nonfiction writing. So yeah, it totally placed my life on a trajectory that would never happen before.
Were there any stories or photos that you did during that year um, that just totally surprised you?
There were, so it's funny. So yes, there were a couple stories that really still just are burned into my memory. There were, I visited the base hospital one time. I was following around this general, and I walk in, and there's just like a burned Iraqi man screaming for his wife. Like all he wants to do is make a phone call. He's like, I want my wife to know I'm alive. Like it was heartbreaking, right? And
Mhm.
everyone's ignoring him. And they're like, oh, he does this all day. I'm like, okay, can maybe we could just get him a phone? Being 20 and naive, right? So that story, and then that we continue to proceed with our tour of this hospital, and like a big commotion starts to happen, and we are rushed to army soldiers are being medevaced in because they were just in a firefight. So we rush into like the ER essentially, um, and they are just covered in blood. One's not even conscious. The general walks over, and he goes to like shake the one guy's hand, and these guys are fucked up, right? And he
Mhm.
looks at me, and he poses for a photo, and I was like, fuck you, man, you're not getting this photo op. So I was like, and I put my camera down. I was like, fuck you, like fuck you,
Nice.
you don't get this, right? So like those type of stories like obviously are in my head, and just I think, I got to meet the Australian soldiers, I got to hang out with the British folks, I got to learn about different MOSs, I got to travel a handful of villages and just see like outside the wire. So the entire experience for me, I mean, it was life altering.
Hmm. Hmm. And meanwhile, so what was going on back home during this time? And like, can you talk about how you kind of found out about that stuff?
Yeah, so I am about halfway through my deployment, and you call home when you can and you email, and my mom starts acting really weird, and I'm like, hey mom, can I talk to dad? She's like, oh, he's taking a nap. I'm like, okay, well, can you wake him up? Like, I'm not gonna get a phone call again. She's like, oh, he's really tired. So this went on for like a handful of times, and finally I got to the point where I was like, mom, can I talk to dad? And she's like, he's not here. And I was like, well, what happened to dad? And long story short, he essentially drank himself almost to death, locked himself in the upstairs bedroom for 3 weeks. He came down the stairs like on a Thursday evening and sat on the ground and started talking about his dead mom. And he
Whoa.
was like 72, 73 at the time. And my mom obviously called 911. He brought to the emergency room, and he weighed 110, 112 pounds, and he's like 5'9", 5'10". Essentially it triggered early onset Alzheimer's dementia. So I find this out, and I'm furious that she didn't tell me. I also understand why she didn't tell me, right? She didn't want me to worry.
Hmm.
But I immediately went to my leadership and I said, hey, X, Y, and Z happened. Can I move up my leave early so I can go home now to be with my mom and my dad? I get approval. In the next few days, I'm on a plane back home to Albany.
Hmm.
And I land, and my mom, I'm in my uniform. I land, and my mom so excited to see me, right? And I have, at this point, I am like, what is happening? We get in the car. The nursing home is literally across the street. It's not far at all. So we drive over there, and everyone, like my mom keeps talking. I'm just silent. I feel like I've been like boomerang back into a situation that I don't even recognize. And I walk down the hallway and I turn the corner and I enter his room, and he's asleep in a chair. And I wake him up, and he's like, Katie. And I was like, hi, Dad. And he reaches out and he touches my uniform. And he's like, I wore that. I was like, oh man, oh man. And he's like, how's Germany? I was like, oh fuck, right? And I was like, it's good, Dad. You know, it's beautiful, just like you told me it was. And he pisses his pants,
Oh my God.
right? So I'm like, okay. So I go to get a nurse to get help, and I just walk down the hallway and I just burst into tears. So I stayed home for my 2 weeks. I turned 21. My mom was still drinking. I was trying to help her during this time. And that was just my new reality. So from that time, for 12 plus years, my dad was in that nursing home.
Oh, wow. And how long during that time, how much of that time were you still in the military?
So I went back to Iraq the day after my 21st birthday for 6 months. And
Mhm.
I could not wait to get back. Like, I know folks just wanted to get out of Iraq, but no, like I had a job, I had friends, I had stability. I was safe, maybe not physically all the time, but like mentally, I felt like, okay, this is the spot I can be. So I went for 6 months, came back, and then I finished out my reserve time. And I think I had, what was it, fives? I had 3 or 4 more years. I got out in 09.
Gotcha. Gotcha. But it sounds like at that time when you did go back to the Middle East, the it sounds like the war at home was almost harder than the war abroad.
Oh,
You wanted to return there because this war at home was actually harder.
it was terrible. I don't, I, it took me, so on top of that, so on top of like those dynamics, I get home and I find out that my mom is behind on the mortgage
Oh,
payments, right? So the house that we lived in was my grandfather's that he had built after World War II, completely paid. They took out a second mortgage on to do God knows what, right? So I find out when I get home, we're totally behind mortgage. We're essentially going to get kicked out of my house, our family home. I write the bank, I go to the bank. I'm like, guys, can I just give me some time? We can catch up. They're like, we gave your mom so many opportunities. Like the answer is no. I said,
and
okay.
you're like, "Hey, I'm a deployed veteran. Does that make any difference? Are we human beings here? Does anyone care?"
Let me tell you, the banks did not give a fuck. They were like, they were like, no, no, bitch, good luck. I was like, okay, thanks.
The
So
banks didn't give a fuck.
no, the banks did not give a fuck. So I go home, and essentially, I don't know, we got like a notice that we had to be out in 15, 30 days, whatever it was. I don't remember the time frame. So we basically start packing as much as we can. Like we didn't have time to clear the house. So we get out of the house, we get an apartment. We move into the apartment. The bank comes to the house and puts a lock on the door with like a sign that says like do not enter. So I'm jumping through my windows at my childhood family home to get belongings. Like I'm talking my mom's wedding dress, my grandfather's World War II uniforms, anything I can get because I'm young. I don't know, like, am I gonna get in trouble for breaking into my house? I don't know what this looks like. So everything that I left behind was totally different. And it took me a long, long time to realize that like you go into a war or whatever you go into, and your mind frame and mindset is like this is about you, right? Like back home, they should be caring and worrying about you. That's we I my fault was thinking that their world stopped while mine kept going, right? And I really learned that like people can't just stop moving because they'll die too, right? So everything had to keep going and keep going. And this is how they handled it. And I just had to figure out how to fold back into that.
Yeah, it's such a hard story. You know, you go away to serve your country, and then it feels like back home everything's just falling apart. So when you get back home, how did you manage to kind of begin your transition? And it sounds like you really did pick up a passion for journalism, and kind of what direction did you start moving in once you got back home?
Okay, so when I came back home, I started writing. I started a blog under the name GI Kate, and I know it's gonna make me sound old, but we were like some of the first bloggers, right, back in the day. This was like 05, 06.
Mhm.
So I just wrote about my military experience, the women in the military, the impacts of family life, my issues with the VA, GI Bill, things of that nature. Um, I finished up my community college. I pulled my grades up, went to SUNY Albany, where I got my degree in journalism. And during that time, I was contacted by now Senator Tammy Duckworth to be part of the VA's team, who would start the digital engagement shop. So, the Facebook page, Twitter, all of those things. So I was part
Mm.
of that. I was offered a job in DC essentially, and I wasn't going to take it. I wanted to take it, but I wasn't going to take it because I felt guilty leaving my mom and dad. And my mom was like, if you don't fucking take this job, go, like, get out of here. Like, you go live your life. And I was like, all right, mom, like, so I did it. So I moved to DC in January 2011,
Mhm.
went down there, worked at VA for a while. And during that time, I continued writing, and I discovered that Johns Hopkins had a writing master's program. And at that
Mhm.
time, I also discovered the Pat Tillman Foundation. So I applied for both, and that kind of, I don't know. I lost my train of thought.
So did you go to Hopkins? I grew up in Silver Spring, so like you're kind of in my world in DC,
Yeah,
Baltimore, Hopkins.
miss it. And now we're both in California.
Yeah.
Um, I,
Exactly.
I did. So I applied for Hopkins and the scholarship, not thinking anything was going to happen. I was the first person, even in my immediate family, to graduate community college, earn my bachelor's degree. So a master's is like a big deal. So I was like, I'm just gonna throw my hat in the ring.
Mhm.
And I get a phone call from the foundation that I was accepted. I had not heard back from Hopkins yet. So I mean, it's a whole process with the foundation. So a few months after I applied, find out I'm in, cry hysterically. I'm on the floor crying. But I'm like, they're like, so when does your degree start? When does your program start at Hopkins? I was like, well, I actually haven't gotten in yet. They were like, I was like, hang on, let me call the guy who runs the program. So actually, I reached out to my Army vet friend who went through the program. He's like, okay, contact this guy. He should hopefully be able to like move some stuff around and see if you get in. So I call, and the guy's like, what's your name? I tell him, and he calls me back 10 minutes later. He's like, yeah, you're in. So I got into both the same day, and it was a 2-year program, and I finished and I graduated in 2014.
Congrats.
Thanks.
For anyone who does not know, can you tell them a little bit what is the Pat Tillman Scholarship?
Yeah. So Pat Tillman, a football player, ASU, he left $1 million contract to join the Army. He
Mhm.
was killed in April 2006, 2005. He was killed by friendly fire. And after he passed away, people started sending his widow, Marie, a bunch of money, and she did not know what to do with that. So she started a foundation to help veterans and their spouses pursue higher education.
Oh,
So
beautiful.
yeah, it's a community. Gosh, I don't know what the number's up to now. Maybe over 500 of veterans and spouses across the country who are pursuing higher ed.
And the
Best community.
his Pat Tillman's story was really big back then, because if I remember correctly, he was supposed to go be like a big star,
Yeah,
and he was like going to be a big football star, and his life was kind of set, and he said, no, I'm going to go be of service to the country. So that's why his story was really huge at that time.
really
For
huge.
for people
Yeah,
that don't remember, or maybe don't remember Word Alive.
I know. Which makes me feel old, but here we are. Yeah, he like in every, for anyone who is listening who is considering going back to school and is like, man, how am I going to afford it? Check out the foundation, amazing scholarships. Money aside, it's not even about that. It is the best people that I've ever met in my life. They will, immediate friends, they will do anything for you. They have your back. Some of the most smartest, wildest, talented, fearless, devoted folks that I've ever met who have carried on Pat's legacy,
Mhm.
and it's like one of the biggest honors of my life.
And that's amazing. So you also met, you're in your transition and you get your scholarship and everything's amazing and all the people involved are amazing. And didn't you meet maybe a significant other during this time? Can we go there? Can we go there?
Woo! You want the tea? I did. I met my soon-to-be ex-husband
Got you. Got you.
through the foundation, and we have, well, I guess claim to fame is we have the first Tillman Foundation kid. So we have the first baby girl.
So you were both Tillman scholars and then you got married and had a baby. And so now you are the parent, you're two parent scholars.
Yes.
Well, congratulations on that.
I know. She's great. She's lovely. So yes, but in the transition to not being a couple anymore.
Yeah. And how does that play into like your transition out of the military and your scholarship? Is that all kind of like intertwined? Can you talk about how like the scholarship and your transition kind of overlap a little bit?
Yeah, I think, let me think how to answer this. So I think so we get, get married, have a baby, everything is great, and life hits really fast, right? So my dad passes away in 2017. COVID happens in 2020. My mom is still in upstate New York. She wants to retire, spend her golden years in California with us. So she moves out. I go home to New York and move her out to California. So she gets to California. She has, I don't know, it was maybe like a year here. We get her into a doctor and we find out that she has stage 4 breast cancer.
Oh no.
Yeah, so she she had hid the cancer for, the assumption is at least 2 to 5 years, like a long time. Like it was
Oh wow.
yeah,
A long time.
a long time. That yeah. So I find out that she has cancer in February 2022, because I brought it to a doctor's appointment, and the doctor was like, "Hey, can you come back here?" And I was like, "Sure." And I sit down. My mom's on the exam table, and she's like, "Did you know?" And I was like, "No, what? Like, what are you talking about?" She's like, "You didn't see your mom's breast?" And I was like, "No." And the doctor was like, "Diane, can you show your daughter?" I was like, "Oh, okay." And so my mom lifts up her shirt, and her entire left breast is shaped like a lemon and is a 10 centimeter tumor. And her nipple's gone. There's a hole in the bottom of her breast, black and leaking.
Oh
And
no.
I didn't even know cancer could do that. And I'm sharing this because I learned so much very quickly that I wish that I knew. And I was like, I froze and just broke it down into tears. And my mom deadpan looks at me and was like, "Why are you crying?" And I
Wow.
was like, "What do you?" I had no words. And the doctor was like, I was like, "Why are you motioning me to like stop?" And the doctor proceeded to tell me that my mom had stage 4 breast cancer. Based just on x-rays, the cancer had spread essentially everywhere, like in her lungs, in her bones, everywhere. Um, and that is kind of how their transition of, my, I don't know, like act 2 maybe of my life kind of got me to where I am today. So I ended up being a caregiver for my mom, for 8 months. She survived and passed, in October of that same year.
I'm so sorry for your loss. So it's like you went to Iraq and then like the stuff with your dad and then you come back and the stuff with your mom. It's all sounds very, very challenging. Is there anything that you did that kind of like helped you through it?
Okay. I've actually had this conversation with a lot of friends, right?
Hmm.
I I should have gotten therapy a long time ago. Like I should have gotten therapy the moment I got home from Iraq. I didn't. I was angry. Um, I was disappointed. I was heartbroken. I, but I was never like, I was never the person that couldn't get out of bed, right? I was always very flatlined. I didn't fluctuate high. I didn't fluctuate low. I could maintain. That's just where I lived. And I lived that way for years until my mom's cancer diagnosis. And I called my VA hospital and I said, I need an appointment with my primary doctor. So they get me in and I said, hey, this is going to be essentially the straw that breaks the camel's back. Like I can't bend anymore. Like I bend. And I was like, this is going to break me. So they were like, okay. They set me up with a therapist. I go to therapy, leading up to throughout my mom's journey with cancer, and just talking about how to approach that, like how to be a caregiver, how do I still be a mother, a partner, essentially all of these things. And I was like, okay, I like kind of figuring this out a bit, talking a little bit about my past, but my past isn't traditional, right? Like I don't have like the doctors were like, not in a negative way, but it was like, so your war was home, not necessarily overseas. So like what do we do with you? Um, so it was kind of like this weird thing where I just almost needed grief therapy. So I was like, okay. So I went, my mom was doing good on oral chemotherapy because I couldn't do traditional, like she's way too far gone. So basically they were like, if this pill works, she'll have a longer extended life. If it doesn't work, she's going to pass away rather quickly. So it worked. So there were like a good 6 months where I was like, okay, she still seems normal, right? I knew she wasn't. So I paused therapy for a little bit. Shouldn't have done that. Um, it gets to the point where it's very obvious that we know that her cancer meds stopped working and the cancer is spreading, like lost a ton of weight. Tumors started popping literally out of her chest, right? Another thing I didn't know that could happen. So that came on very quickly. I forced her to move into my house on a Tuesday. By Friday, she was no, on a Sunday. By Tuesday, I made her go to the hospital, to her doctors in hospital. They made us go to the ER. By Friday, she died. Right. So it happened really quickly. She passes away, and I'm, I'm devastated. Like I have a breakdown like seeing her dead body. I freak out, pull it together. I reached back out. I mean, I see all the, my mom dies. It's, I don't know how to necessarily process that in a proper way. I join a gym. I try to do all the things that have worked for me in my past. And I remember just driving around I was coming back from the grocery store and I'm like sobbing, punching my steering wheel. Like I'm pissed. And I thought for a split second, well, I don't have anybody left. There's no one else in my life aside from my daughter. I've done some cool stuff. I had a good life. If anything happened to her, I'm going to kill myself. I'm done. I'm done being here. I'm over it. So I knew at that moment that I snapped out of it. And within like the 30 seconds that went through my head, I snapped out of it and I was like, wow, like that's not where I need to be. Like I can't be in this mindset. So I
Hmm.
reached back out to VA the next day, scheduled another therapy appointment, and started Prozac. And I never in my life have taken any type of medicine.
Hmm.
But that like 30-second thought of suicide pushed me to the point where I was like, I need more because this is a thing that broke me finally.
Wow. Oh my God. Um, and well, thank you for sharing that. And now you feel like though you've moved through that and kind of like what's going on now? Like what are you working on and like yeah, where are you at now?
Yeah, so I think okay, so with the help of the gym and then watching my mom pass away, I it kind of spurred me to take action with my own life, right? So I I wasn't gonna, I left a marriage that wasn't working, right? I decided that, let me backtrack. So I learned through therapy that I operate out of a place of guilt, right? So I always was guilty for not helping somebody enough or not doing this enough or man, I should have done that for that person. And I learned that I can't have that mindset anymore. And that really was put into action after seeing my mom pass away. So I left a marriage that wasn't working, really honed in on my physical fitness, started writing again a bit. Moved out of the house that I shared with my ex and suddenly realized that I don't need to be anywhere that I don't truly fit in or belong or need to beg somebody to show up for me, right? And
Yeah.
that wouldn't have happened without watching my mom pass away and realizing like, it was just us at her bedside when she passed, right? Like it's gonna when you pass, like you're like there's two people, three people that might show up for you, right? Like so don't live your life for anyone else. Like don't make people comfortable, like don't make yourself comfortable type thing, right? So got out of these situations and I stopped taking Prozac, which cold turkey, which you're not supposed to do. Like no one do that, please. But I realized like I am finally feeling happiness for the first time in my life. And I'm learning how to like allow that into my life because it's always been like one thing after another, right? Like
It sounds like it.
yeah, I can do trauma really well and like the bullshit, but I don't know how to just be happy and let the good things in and like take that for what they are.
Mhm.
And I that only started happening once I lost everything that held me on to kind of my past,
Mhm.
which I don't know if that's like a good thing or a bad thing, but I almost feel free from everything, including the war and everything that was like kind of shaped my life for the past 20 years. Then now I'm like, oh, I can breathe. Like I can
Wow.
smile. I don't know, I can drink a beer and go down a slip and slide and like talk to you and like share these experiences and hopefully like help other people see like there is a way to the other side. I don't know. So that's kind of where I'm at now.
I think that was really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And some of the stuff you said that I think is really important about, you're kind of, it sounds like you were basically saying, I got to a point where I really decided I'm going to take care of myself and I'm not going to feel guilty for putting myself first. And I think that's really beautiful. And I never thought about it the way you said it, but what you said was, when we're all gonna pass away, and when you do, maybe a couple people are gonna show up for you. I'm like, wow, that's actually a good point. Like, you should
And,
probably do what you love and what makes you happy.
yes, and it broke my heart because I it broke my heart because I learned so many things about my mom leading up to her death that she just held so tight and so close.
Hmm.
That man, like she made so many sacrifices, right? That I didn't even know about until it was too late. So I didn't get a chance to thank her enough, right? I'm gonna
Hmm.
cry. And I kind of made the promise to her that like I'm gonna live this life for not only her, for me, but for my kid, right? So I want my kid to see you can say the right things and but you're not nothing's gonna change without action. So as hard as it will be to like remove yourself or say no or say yes or show up or take a chance or tell somebody to fuck off, whatever that looks like you have like just do it because you're gonna be scared the entire way through it all. But you're never gonna sit on that deathbed and be like, man, I wish I stayed in that shit situation longer, you know? And my
Hmm.
and my mom shared those things with me. And she like the only thing she asked for was she's like, I wish we had more adventures together, right? So just do the things. Big, small, silly, it doesn't matter. Um,
I thank you for sharing that. I just want to like, I'm relating to you too because in my own life, I I'm dating a new partner and she like wants to do all these adventures. And I'm like kind of like, it's like a lot, like it's expensive and like there's so much. And now I'm like, I feel like you're right. Like just do it, like why would you not do the adventure?
Why would you not like that? But it's hard, right? Like I
Yeah.
don't know how to think that way. I'm like, okay, all right, fuck it. Let's do that thing that I'm terrified of. But what
Yeah, like we're just to be more to put more like to be more like forthcoming, like we're talking about going to Egypt, and like I'm a little bit like, oh my gosh, I don't know, I'm not sure, but now like especially like with this conversation, I'm like, do the adventure. Like when we
sir,
get to the end, there's gonna be like maybe one person show up for us, and you're gonna be there going, oh man, you're never gonna be at the end going, oh, it's a good thing I didn't do that. I was glad I stayed home and just sat on the Netflix in the couch was the move. No, no, you got to go
go to
for it.
Egypt. If you don't go to Egypt, I'm gonna be pissed at you. I'm
We should do a follow-up episode after I go to Egypt.
gonna show up like, hey guys, no, do it, do the thing.
Yeah, yeah. I also thank you so much. I think this is like this is the part of the conversation where it like all pays off, you know. It's like love yourself, go for it, you know.
Do it.
Um
Like, yeah, put yourself first, and no one else is gonna care about yourself the way you do, right? So just go and but show up for yourself. I'm still think I'm a weird goofball that like with imposter syndrome and like don't belong places, but that's so fucking stupid. Like I'm here for a reason. If I help one person, that's great. Like maybe you'll go to Egypt now. Mission accomplished.
yeah, thank you. And you know, it was also really beautiful what you said about you said something along the lines of I'm going to choose to go where I'm loved and wanted. And, you know, I'm not going to do these things that suck anymore. I'm paraphrasing now, but um,
Yeah. Yeah. I think, yeah, I, again, like, I think it goes back to the fact that I've not like to be a Debbie Downer, but I mean this in a positive way. Like, I lost everybody in my life aside from my daughter. And I want her to see my actions, and I want her to never be in a situation that I put myself in because I didn't know my own self-worth. So if
mhm,
she sees me blowing my life up a couple times, but to get to a better spot, and we can dance in the kitchen together and make pancakes on a Sunday morning singing music, like that's worth it to me. And I hope that she doesn't have to go through some bullshit like I did to get to that spot, right? So that
beautiful.
I mean that's just my end goal. That's my end goal for me and for her. Like I want her to be okay and show up as her authentic self where she's
I love
beloved and
that.
wanted.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
Um, so what are you working on now? Are you writing anything or what is like what are you working on?
Okay. I wrote a screenplay once.
Ooh, nice.
It's fucking trash. It's trash. It has one good line, but I did it, right? Like
Mhm.
for my ultimate goal, I want to write a book. And it's been a very long time since I put pen to paper just because it's just hard to get this shit out, right?
Mm.
But that's my goal. So I'm working on a query letter, a synopsis now. I'm working with a good friend who's going to help me edit and work this stuff. And there's one agency that I'm going to send it to just to see what happens and try to put myself out there.
Nice.
That's my
Is it a
personal goal. Yeah, and I work in government still with veterans, and I'll always just be a veteran advocate to
Mhm.
help my fellow veterans.
I love that. Thank you for continuing to be of service.
It's
Is your book fiction or nonfiction?
nonfiction.
Nonfiction? Okay, cool. Can you tell us like a little bit? I don't want you to like spoil anything, but like what kind of like genre are you dabbling in?
I mean, it's like military experience, but I call it Generation Kill meets Eat, Pray, Love.
Okay, okay. And is this a book? Could it continue on and be a series of many books? Could our
Oh,
main character continue on and have more adventures or
maybe. Let me get through the first one. I don't know.
okay.
I don't know.
Okay, cool, cool.
It
Yeah,
depends on how many more bad decisions I make with my life.
I'm very curious because you know I had Mark Graney on who wrote the Gray Man book series, and
Ooh.
his people sent me like 14 books, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm kind of like a amateur, you know, would like to write a book one day kind of guy myself, and then I get someone's publicist send me like 14 books, and I'm just like, I'm start with one over here.
Right in the corner now. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
hard.
exactly.
Writing's hard, but it's my goal. That's the next thing.
Yeah, amazing. Um, well, I think. it's probably a good time to maybe start to wind this episode down. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story, and the stuff that you shared about transitioning and the therapy and like how to take care of yourself. I hope people hear that and are empowered by that. And I feel like I am. I feel like, I'll email you after Egypt and we'll do a follow-up episode.
Dude, please email me. That's what I always say. Like, anyone listening to this, I don't know if you put Instagram handles or whatever it is, like, reach out. Like, I will happily be your person if you have somebody going through like a hard time. I will help you pack your shit to get out of a bad situation. I will encourage you to go to therapy. I will take a walk with you. I will do, like, you need those people that show up, no questions asked. And that's the only thing that got me to where I am today, are those like 5 solid friends who have done that for me repeatedly.
Yeah.
And we have to have each other's, oh my God, I hate when people say that, have each other's back, but it's true. It's true. It's corny, but it's true.
It honestly, it's so important to have those close friends and to reach out to them and remind them and say, "Hey, I like you." For me, at least, it's important to tell them like, "Hey, you were like really there for me, and just so you know, like that meant a lot to me." You know,
Oh, I'm
if
so annoying. I
and
text
if
my
I can
friends
do
every day.
that, if I can do that for you, please let me know. I know we're talking about my problems a lot.
You're like, oh, but the situation, totally. Yes. Like, always be a sounding board. I tell my friends literally every single day that I love them, because I do. Like, they're my family at this point. So I'm
Beautiful.
lucky. Yeah.
Beautiful. I'm going to share. I have a buddy, one of my best friends. His name's Cody. He's been on the show actually before. And he says, I love you to like all his friends. And he started saying that to me like on phone calls and stuff. And I'd be like, okay, okay. And then like at one point he's like, hey, I just want you to know, like, I know it makes you uncomfortable, but I'm going to keep saying it because that's just how I feel. So we're just gonna put that out into the world. Where can people find you? I know you work at the VA and like IG do you have IG, or what is a good website, or where can people find you?
Yeah, I use my Instagram a lot. It's Kate and then Arita, Kate Arita. That's my middle name. I do have a Twitter X account. I don't use it as much, but it's still on there. I just read everything now, but that'd be the best, Instagram. And then maybe I get a website and a book. We'll see.
Yeah, amazing. We'll have to keep in touch. So our follow-up episode, just to recap, we're gonna have Egypt, and then we'll also do a book check-in on kind of status report on where you're at.
Yes, I love this. Being held accountable. I'm here for it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thanks again for coming on the podcast, and I think we would probably leave it there.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Have a good one, everyone.